They told me to sit down and be quiet at my own husband's house. The words sounded almost casual, almost like a suggestion, but the weight behind them was crushing. I had walked into that dining room hoping for warmth, for at least a shred of respect after everything I had endured. Instead, I walked into a theater where the play had already been written and my role had been cut from the script. They spoke around me, above me, through me, as though my presence was nothing but an inconvenience. They wanted me invisible. That night I had prepared myself carefully. I pressed my blouse twice, checked my lipstick in the mirror again and again, and whispered to myself not to cry no matter what happened. I told myself it was only dinner, only family, only the people I had loved and sacrificed for over 4 decades. But the moment I stepped through the doorway, I felt it, the chill that comes when you realize your place in the family has been reassigned without your consent. My son Blake poured wine like he was the master of ceremonies, his wife gliding beside him in her golden shoes as though the house were hers. My younger son Trevor gave me a quick nod, not the warm kind of a child seeing his mother, but the stiff acknowledgement you might give a stranger at a funeral. Even the grandchildren barely looked at me. They once clung to me, begged me for sweets, but now they offered polite smiles and lowered eyes as though they had been instructed to treat me as a guest rather than their grandmother. I set the blueberry pie on the counter. Henry used to say it was my masterpiece, the one recipe that could soften any heart. I thought perhaps it might soften the mood that evening. No one touched it. No one even mentioned it. The smell of roasted meat filled the room, the clink of glasses echoed like bells of arrogance, and I realized the pie was not just ignored, it was symbolic. Everything I had brought, everything I had given, had no place here anymore. We sat at the table, the one I had bought them for Christmas, and Blake leaned back with the confidence of a man who believed the world belonged to him. He said we should simplify things. His words floated on the air like harmless suggestions, but I knew exactly what he meant. Simplify meant removing me. Simplify meant dividing what Henry and I built and erasing the woman who helped build it. I asked carefully if they had spoken to the lawyer about the trust. My voice was steady, but my heart thudded in my chest. That was when Candace, my daughter-in-law, did not even bother to look up from her phone. She muttered that I was just the widow now, and maybe I should stay quiet. The words were soft, but they were poison, and they landed with a finality that rang louder than any shout. The room chuckled. Blake laughed. Trevor laughed. Their laughter pressed against me like the lid of a coffin closing. My hands trembled under the table, not from weakness but from the weight of that moment, the recognition that grief was not enough for them. They wanted erasure. They wanted me buried alive in silence. I placed my fork down with care. I looked around the table at the faces of people I had raised, the people who had leaned on me, the people whose very lives had been cushioned by the sacrifices Henry and I made. Their eyes did not meet mine. I stood. I did not cry. I did not plead. I gave them nothing but my silence. Then I walked out. The laughter followed me down the hallway. It rang in my ears as the front door closed behind me. The night air was cold, slicing through the fabric of my blouse, but I welcomed it. After 43 years, the silence felt like peace instead of loneliness. I drove home slowly, headlights cutting through the darkness, my heart a storm of anger and sorrow. Each mile reminded me of what had been built, what had been given, what had been stolen in that single evening by the people I once trusted most. When I reached home, I sat in Henry's old recliner, the brown one with the frayed edges where his hand always rested. I wrapped myself in the throw blanket we used to fight over during the winter. The house was still, the silence thick. His photo hung on the wall, capturing a smile that once gave me strength. I whispered his name but received only the echo of my own voice. Widow. That word circled my mind like a vulture. Widow meant alone. Widow meant powerless. Widow meant disposable. But as the hours stretched on, as the silence deepened, something shifted. I realized silence was not weakness. Silence was waiting. Silence was breathing in before the strike. They had mistaken my grief for fragility. They had mistaken my quiet for surrender. They had mistaken me for someone who would accept being erased. They were wrong. I leaned back in that chair and closed my eyes. The memory of the dinner still burned inside me. I saw their smirks, their careless laughter, the way they dismissed me as though I had never existed. My chest ached, but my resolve grew stronger with every breath. They thought I was just the widow. They thought I was finished. But in the darkness of that room, in the silence of that house, I felt a fire begin to rise. The fire was not loud, not yet. It was steady, patient, waiting for its moment. And as the clock ticked past midnight, I promised myself I would no longer be invisible. They would learn that the woman they pushed aside was not broken. She was watching. She was waiting. And when the time came, she would not whisper. She would roar. I did not sleep that night. The house was too quiet, too heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I sat in Henry's chair and stared at the shadows crawling along the floor. The silence was thick, but inside me the noise was deafening. Their words replayed again and again until I could almost hear them in different voices. Just the widow. Just the widow. Stay quiet. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, but each breath felt like swallowing glass. I had given everything to that family. I had stood beside Henry when we had nothing but canned soup for lunch and hope for dessert. I had watched every penny, skipped every vacation, patched every tear in old clothes just so our sons could have shoes that fit and a future that looked bright. Now they sat in houses bought with our sacrifices and laughed at me as though I were a guest overstaying her welcome. The pie sat untouched in their kitchen. I pictured it there, cooling on the counter, ignored the same way I was ignored. That pie was supposed to soften the evening. It was supposed to remind them of the woman who had raised them, of the father who had loved them, of the family that was meant to matter more than money. But it was nothing to them, nothing but sugar and fruit and forgotten effort, just like me. I stood and walked slowly through my home. Every step echoed too loudly. The photographs on the wall seemed to stare at me with judgment. Henry in his work shirt, grinning with grease on his hands from fixing the car. The boys as children, smiling with missing teeth and scraped knees. Our wedding photo on the courthouse steps, both of us young and terrified but ready to fight the world together. They were reminders of a life that was real, a love that was real, and sacrifices that were real. But now the people in those pictures were gone, replaced by grown men with sharp smiles and cold wives who wanted to strip me of everything. I poured a glass of water and set it down without drinking. My hands would not stop trembling. Anger and grief twisted together until I could not tell them apart. I whispered to the air, to Henry, to anyone who might still be listening. I am not done. You think I am small, but I am not. The hours dragged. At 2 a.m, I heard the faint creak of the old cabinet across the hall. It was not real, just my memory pulling me there. That cabinet had always been forbidden territory, the place where we kept documents and things the boys did not need to see. It was the no-go drawer, the sacred drawer, the drawer that held the skeleton of our family's survival. I thought about opening it, thought about rummaging through the old files for proof that I still mattered, but fear held me in the chair. Fear that I might find nothing. Fear that they were right. I pressed the blanket to my chest and tried to force myself to sleep. The clock ticked, steady and cruel. My eyes burned, but I refused to close them. Every time I thought of their laughter, of the way they dismissed me, the fire inside me grew hotter. I imagined walking back into that dining room, standing tall and shouting the truth in their faces. I imagined flipping their wine glasses over, smashing their arrogance into shards, but I had done none of that. I had walked away. Did that make me weak, or did it make me dangerous? I did not know yet. All I knew was that something in me had shifted. I was not the same woman who had walked into that dinner hoping to be respected. That version of me had been buried in their laughter. What remained was something new, something sharper, something that would not rest until balance was restored. I sat there until the first pale light of dawn slid across the curtains. The sky was soft and pink, the kind of morning Henry used to say was perfect for fishing. I remembered how he would wake the boys at 4 a.m, load the truck, and head out to the lake while I stayed behind to make sandwiches for when they returned. They never thanked me. They were too young to understand. But I never asked for thanks. I only wanted them to have memories worth keeping. Now those boys were men who looked at me as if I were an obstacle instead of a mother. Men who laughed when their wives told me to stay quiet. Men who thought my silence meant surrender. But they did not know me anymore. They did not see what was coming. I stood at the window and watched the sun climb higher. The light spilled into the room, chasing away the shadows, and I felt the warmth on my face. Something hardened in me. The night had taken one version of me and replaced it with another. I whispered aloud, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. Enough. That word echoed in the empty house. Enough of being erased. Enough of being small. Enough of letting them carve up what was mine. I did not know yet how I would fight or what weapon I would find, but I knew I would not be silent again. The night they thought they had broken me was the night I began to rise. They saw me walk away from that table, but what they did not see was that I walked away with fire in my chest. They believed they had won, but they had only awakened something I had buried for too long. I was not just the widow. I was the woman who built the walls they lived in, the woman who carried the weight they now called inheritance, the woman who had been told to sit down but had decided instead to stand taller than ever. And as the first morning of my new life filled the house with light, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This story was no longer theirs. It was mine. That morning after the dinner, I felt like my body had aged 10 years overnight. My bones were heavy, my chest tight, and my hands still trembled as if the laughter from the night before had sunk into my skin. I tried to drink coffee, but the taste was bitter, not from the beans but from the memory that clung to every sip. The house was too quiet, and I kept expecting Henry to walk in, humming some tune under his breath, carrying the newspaper folded under his arm. He did not come. He never would. That was the weight of widowhood, the emptiness that stretched out like a desert no matter how many people stood around you. By midday, I could not bear sitting in silence anymore. My eyes kept drifting toward the old cabinet in the hallway, the one Henry always called the no-go drawer. That drawer had been off limits for the boys their entire childhood. They used to joke that it was filled with treasure or secrets, but I knew it was simply where we kept passports, titles, insurance forms, and the boring bones of a family's survival. Still, the thought of it tugged at me. Maybe inside I would find proof that I still mattered. Maybe some remnant of Henry's trust, something that would remind me I had not been erased. I hesitated for a long time. I walked past the cabinet again and again. The wood was scratched and dull, the handle cold against my fingers. I felt foolish standing there, arguing with myself. What was I expecting to find? A miracle hidden among old receipts and tax returns? My heart pounded as if even considering opening it was some kind of betrayal. Henry had guarded that drawer, not out of secrecy, but out of protection. He believed some burdens were not meant to be carried by children. But I was not a child. I was a woman who had been told to stay quiet in the house she helped build. Finally, I opened it. The air smelled faintly of dust and paper, a scent that pulled me back to the night's Henry, and I sat cross-legged on the floor balancing checkbooks and planning how to pay bills. I pushed aside passports, birth certificates, and envelopes of old photographs. My fingers trembled as they brushed over documents, each one a reminder of the life we built brick by brick. And then I saw it. A thick white envelope wedged in the back, pressed so far behind the others that it looked almost forgotten. But the moment my eyes landed on it, my breath caught. My name was written across the front in Henry's handwriting. Delilah. I froze, my knees weakened. Henry was not the type of man who left sentimental notes. His love was shown through fixed gutters and repaired tires, through steady hands that held the weight of our world without complaint. He did not write letters. And yet here it was, solid and undeniable, my name staring back at me in the curves of his script. I pulled it out carefully as though it might vanish if I moved too quickly. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper folded neatly, and behind it a stack of documents clipped together. The first page was a letter. My eyes blurred before I even began to read. If you are reading this, something has already gone wrong. I wanted to tell you sooner, but I knew if I did you would try to fix everything instead of protecting yourself. Our sons are not bad, but they are selfish. And the women they married worse. I saw it happening the moment I got sick, so I made changes. Everything is in your name now. The houses, the accounts, the company, the property by the lake, all of it. They do not know, do not feel guilty for using it, do not let them silence you. And if they ever try, burn it all down. I read the words again and again, my tears smudging the ink. My husband had seen it all. He had known what would happen after he was gone. He had looked at our sons and seen their hunger for control. He had looked at their wives and seen the greed sharpening behind their smiles. And instead of waiting for them to devour me, he had left me the power to fight. Behind the letter were the documents. They were real. Stamped, signed, notarized. Property transfers, financial authorizations, power of attorney. Everything that once rested on his shoulders now rested on mine. I had not been cut out. I had not been forgotten. I had been chosen. My breath came fast and shallow. I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered his name. You always knew they would turn on me. My tears dripped onto the paper, but I did not care. The letter was not fragile. It was steel. I looked at the documents again, flipping through page after page, trying to absorb the weight of it. My mind raced back to the dinner, to their smirks, their laughter, their arrogant dismissal of me. They believed I was powerless. They believed I was just the widow. But Henry had left me with the kind of power they could never imagine. For the first time since the funeral, I did not feel like a victim. I felt strong, stronger than I had in years. The fire inside me that had sparked the night before roared higher now. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. I could not stop touching the papers as though the texture itself could reassure me that they were real. Each page felt heavier than it should, not because of the ink or the signatures, but because of the responsibility that now rested in my hands. I laid them out across the floor, lined them in careful rows, and looked at them the way a general might study a map before a war. For years, I had convinced myself that my role was to support, to comfort, to stand quietly in the background while Henry led the way. Yet here, in black and white, was his final declaration that I was not background at all. I was the one he trusted to carry everything forward. I whispered his name into the stillness of the house. It sounded strange, like calling out across an empty canyon. There was no answer, but there was the letter, his handwriting looping across the page, speaking for him. You are stronger than they know. Do not let them silence you. Do not let them erase you. His voice lived in those sentences, firm and protective, a reminder that he had always seen me clearly, even when others did not. For a long time, I sat motionless. I thought about the dinner table, about Candace's smirk, about the sound of Blake's laugh. My body shivered with anger, but underneath the anger was something harder, sharper. It was clarity. They believed I had been reduced to nothing, but in truth I had been given everything. The irony was almost cruel. The very night they tried to erase me was the night I discovered I had the power to erase their illusions. The phone rang again, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet. Blake's name flashed on the screen. I did not answer. Let him stew in his arrogance for a while. He thought I was avoiding him because I was weak, because I was ashamed. He would never imagine that I was ignoring him because I no longer needed him. I let the call go to voicemail and then turned the phone face down. The silence that followed was not oppressive. It was liberating. I began to imagine what the next days would bring. The shock on their faces when they realized the accounts were locked. The confusion when they tried to move money and found themselves powerless. The fury when they discovered that the woman they had mocked as just the widow held every key to their future. A small smile crept onto my face and startled me. It was not the smile of joy. It was the smile of a woman who finally understood her worth. As the hours passed, I organized the documents into stacks. Real estate titles in one pile, bank accounts in another. Company shares and legal authorizations in their own neat bundle. The more I ordered them, the more the chaos inside me settled. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt in control. Grief had drowned me, but purpose was pulling me to the surface. I thought of our boys as children, running barefoot in the backyard, their laughter innocent and bright. I thought of Henry sitting on the porch, pride shining in his eyes as he watched them chase each other. Somewhere along the way, that innocence had hardened into greed. I grieved for the children they once were, but I refused to grieve for the men they had become. They had chosen their path, and now they would face the consequences. When evening fell, I tucked the envelope beneath my pillow as though it were a shield I could sleep upon. My body was exhausted, but my mind was alive with plans. I imagined walking into the lawyer's office with the documents in hand. I imagined signing my name, claiming my authority, solidifying the fortress Henry had built for me. I imagined the moment I would reveal the truth to my sons, not in anger but in calm certainty, the way a judge delivers a sentence that cannot be appealed. I closed my eyes and whispered again. Thank you, Henry. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for giving me the strength I had forgotten I possessed. The words slipped into the darkness like a prayer, and for the first time in weeks, sleep came easily. It was not the restless sleep of a widow drowning in sorrow. It was the steady sleep of a woman preparing for battle. And when I woke, I knew that the silence which once felt like defeat had transformed into something entirely different. It was not the silence of weakness. It was the silence before a storm. The morning after I found Henry's letter, the house felt different. Sunlight streamed through the curtains in wide golden bands, and instead of feeling exposed by it, I felt illuminated. I woke with the envelope still beneath my pillow, and for a moment I clutched it against my chest, reassuring myself that it had not been a dream. The weight of those papers was as real as the pulse in my veins. I brewed coffee slowly, almost ceremonially, and sat at the table where Henry and I had spent so many nights planning our lives. I spread the documents out again and studied them with a clear mind. The fear that had clung to me the day before was gone. In its place was resolve. My husband had not left me to be devoured by our sons. He had left me armed, and now it was time to use what he had given me. The first step was to call the lawyer. My hands shook slightly as I dialed his number, but my voice was steady when he answered. He was surprised to hear from me. For years, all legal matters had gone through Henry, while I remained in the background. I told him about the envelope, about the documents, and there was a pause on the line. Then his voice softened, almost reverent. "Henry prepared for this," he said. "He wanted to make sure you were protected. Everything you have is legitimate, but you need to act quickly. Do not give them time to challenge it." Those words echoed in my mind long after I hung up. Do not give them time. I knew my sons well enough to understand what that meant. The moment they sensed even a trace of power slipping from their hands, they would pounce. They would not hesitate to twist the law, to manipulate the truth, to smear my name if it gave them an advantage. I could not let them move first, so I drove to the bank. The teller greeted me politely, unaware of the storm gathering beneath my calm exterior. I handed over the documents, each one bearing the seal that transferred authority into my name. She flipped through them, her eyes widening slightly before she excused herself to speak with the manager. When she returned, her voice was measured, careful. "Yes, Mrs. Diaz, the accounts are now under your sole control. We will update everything immediately. Would you like to change access privileges for other family members?" I almost laughed. Access privileges, as though my sons had been privileged to anything at all. "Yes," I said firmly. "Remove their names, all of them." The click of her keyboard was the sound of doors slamming shut. With each keystroke, another chain of control snapped into my hands. The accounts that my sons assumed were theirs to drain were now locked. The credit lines they leaned on were frozen. Their financial playground had vanished, and they did not even know it yet. From the bank, I went to the office of our family company. Walking through those glass doors was surreal. For years, I had visited only as Henry's wife, a polite figure who smiled at employees and stayed out of the real work. But now I carried documents that made me the sole shareholder, the owner of every decision. The receptionist looked startled when I asked to see the records. Within an hour, the paperwork was updated. Delilah Diaz, my name, not Henry, not Blake, not Trevor's, mine. When I stepped back onto the street, the air felt different. For months, I had carried grief like a cloak that weighed me down. Now it felt as though I had shed it, leaving only steel behind. I was no longer stumbling through widowhood. I was standing upright in power. As I drove home, my phone lit up with messages. "Blake again? Where have you been? We need to meet. Do not make things harder." Then another from Trevor. "Stop avoiding us. We need to settle things." Their impatience bled through the words. They thought they were cornering me. They had no idea that I had already stripped them of the very things they wanted to fight over. At home, I sat in Henry's chair and allowed myself a smile. It was small, almost fragile, but it was real. The first strike had been made. The accounts were mine. The company was mine. The property was mine, and they were still laughing somewhere, believing I was powerless. Soon enough, they would learn the truth. I closed my eyes and pictured the next steps. There would be resistance. There would be outrage. They would come at me with anger sharpened into cruelty. But I was no longer afraid. I was ready. The storm had begun, and I was the one holding the lightning. The silence in the house that evening felt different from the night before. It was no longer the silence of humiliation. It was the silence of victory, small but undeniable. I walked from room to room with the papers in my hand, touching the walls, running my fingers along the furniture, seeing everything with new eyes. This was not their house. This was not their inheritance waiting to be carved into pieces. This was mine. I boiled water for tea, the kind Henry always teased me about for being too bitter, and sat with my cup as the phone buzzed again and again on the counter. Blake called twice more. Then Candace left a message with her sharp voice dripping sugar that barely concealed venom. "We only want to help. Let us take care of the hard parts. You should not worry yourself." I almost laughed out loud. Her performance would have fooled someone else, but not me. She did not want to take care of me. She wanted to take care of the money. I let the phone ring until the sound became background noise, like a distant siren. Instead of answering, I opened the binder of company records the lawyer had given me that afternoon. Page after page bore my name now. My authority was stamped in ink and sealed in law. For years, I had stayed away from those documents because I believed they belonged to Henry's world. But the truth was, they belonged to both of us all along. And now, they belonged to me alone. I thought about the employees at the company, men and women who had greeted me politely for years without ever realizing the role I had played behind the scenes. They would soon see me in a different light. Not as the widow drifting in for occasional visits, but as the woman signing their checks, approving their budgets, directing their future. A flicker of fear passed through me. Would they respect me, or would they doubt me the way my own sons had? Then I shook the thought away. Respect was no longer something I waited to be given. Respect was something I would command. Night fell. I sat at the kitchen table and spread the accounts before me. Numbers glowed on the pages, balances that would make most people dizzy. I remembered the nights when Henry and I argued about paying the mortgage, when we stretched $50 across 2 weeks of groceries, when I mended old dresses to look new. Those numbers had been small, but they had felt enormous then. Now the numbers were enormous, but they felt small compared to what I had endured to reach them. Money could not buy love, but it could buy freedom. And freedom was what I intended to claim. At midnight, I finally picked up the phone and returned one call, not to Blake or Trevor, but to my lawyer. His voice was calm but firm. "We must move quickly," he said. "I will draft notices to ensure no unauthorized transactions slip through. Once your sons realize they are locked out, they will be desperate. Expect confrontation. Expect them to accuse you of betrayal. Do not let them rattle you." I thanked him and hung up. My chest tightened, not with fear but with anticipation. Betrayal, they would say, as if I had betrayed them, but who had betrayed whom? I had been their mother, their provider, their constant shield, and in return they had laughed at me and shoved me aside. If betrayal was the word, it belonged to them, not me. I went to bed with the envelope once again under my pillow. Sleep came slowly, filled with restless dreams of storms and broken glass, but when I woke the next morning I felt sharper, more awake. My first strike had been clean and precise. Accounts frozen, company secured, property untouchable. The war had not yet begun, but the battlefield was already mine. I stood at the mirror and studied my reflection. For the first time in months, I saw not just a widow. I saw a woman armed with truth, with law, with the foresight of a husband who had trusted her more than anyone else. I touched the glass, looked into my own eyes, and whispered a vow. I will not bow, I will not break. And as I stepped into the day, I knew they would come soon, with anger, with accusations, with schemes. Let them come. I was ready. The first strike had been mine, but I knew it would not be the last move in this game. Power never shifts quietly. By the end of the week, the air itself felt tense, like the pause before thunder. I sensed they were planning something, waiting for a moment when they could corner me. I did not have to wait long. It was a Thursday afternoon when the knock came. Sharp, impatient, a rhythm that told me whoever stood outside believed they had the right to enter. When I opened the door, Blake stood there holding a bouquet of lilies wrapped in glossy paper. In his other hand, he carried a slim leather folder. His eyes flickered over my shoulder into the house, not with love or longing, but with the hunger of someone already imagining possession. "Mother," he said, smiling in a way that did not reach his eyes, "I thought I should check on you." I stepped aside. I wanted to see what he thought he could hide. He walked in with the confidence of a man rehearsing a role. He set the flowers on the counter with exaggerated care and then placed the folder on the kitchen table. The gesture was so deliberate it made my stomach turn. He wanted me to look inside. I did. The folder was thick with statements and receipts. At first glance it looked ordinary, just the regular flow of company expenses, but I had learned to read between the lines. Certain figures were circled, others blacked out. Then I saw them clearly. Large transfers disguised as maintenance costs, payments that went not to contractors but to shadow accounts. Blake had been bleeding money from the company, funneling it into debts that were his alone. I kept my face calm, though inside my chest thundered. My son, the boy I had raised, the boy I had once rocked to sleep after nightmares, had turned into a man who used his father's business as a gambling table. He leaned against the counter and launched into his speech. "It is not as bad as it looks," he said smoothly. "The company has cash flow. These were temporary measures. Everyone does this." Father would have understood. Every word tasted rehearsed, every justification twisted. He did not speak like a man ashamed. He spoke like a man bargaining for more time. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang again. I already knew who it would be. Candace swept in without waiting for permission, her perfume arriving before her. She kissed the air near my cheek and slipped her manicured hand over mine as if we were old friends. "Delilah," she said sweetly, "you should not carry all this alone. You look tired. Let us help." Her eyes flicked to the folder, then back to me. She knew exactly what was inside. She was not here to help me. She was here to contain the damage. They began to circle me with words, weaving a net of concern and false affection. Blake told me business was complicated and dangerous in the wrong hands. Candace whispered that stress could damage my health, that grief could cloud my judgment, that people might try to take advantage of a widow. Each sentence dripped with honey, but the aftertaste was poison. I sat in Henry's chair at the head of the table, listening, letting the silence stretch between their sentences. The longer I stayed quiet, the faster their words tumbled out. Blake's voice grew harsher, less controlled. Candace's smile stiffened, her grip on my hand tightening as though she could hold me in place. They were unraveling, and I had to do nothing but watch. Finally, I spoke, slowly, deliberately. Henry trusted me. He gave me everything. And I will not hand it to anyone who thinks I am just the widow. The room froze. For the first time since he arrived, Blake had no ready answer. His jaw clenched, the muscles twitching as anger fought with disbelief. Candace's painted smile cracked, her eyes narrowing before she quickly tried to recover. But the damage was done. I had named the truth aloud, and the truth cannot be disguised once it is spoken. They left soon after, though not before Blake slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I stood in the silence they left behind, my pulse steady. I gathered the folder, tucked it next to Henry's letter, and let the fire inside me burn higher. I had unmasked them without shouting, without threats, simply by refusing to play their game. Blake's debts were no longer his secret. Candace's schemes no longer hid behind her false affection. I had seen the truth, and once seen, it could not be unseen. That night I slept with the folder under my pillow, not because I feared they would return for it, but because it reminded me of what I was fighting for. Proof of betrayal. Proof that my husband's foresight had been right. Proof that I was no longer the silent widow but the woman standing guard over everything they thought they could steal. And as I drifted into sleep, I realized something powerful. They had come into my house armed with lies, but they left stripped of their masks. From now on, every step they took would be haunted by the knowledge that I saw them for what they truly were. After Blake and Candace stormed out, the house seemed to sigh with relief, as though even the walls had grown tired of their performance. I gathered the flowers he had brought, stripped of their false meaning, and tossed them into the trash. Their petals looked perfect, but perfection can be a lie. Underneath, the stems were already wilting. I sat at the table staring at the folder. My fingers brushed over the papers again and again, tracing the numbers that spelled out betrayal. The weight of it pressed down on me, not because I doubted what I had to do, but because it confirmed something I had not wanted to admit. My sons were not lost to grief. They were consumed by greed. Later that night, Trevor called. His tone was different from Blake's sharpness, more measured, almost soothing. He asked how I was holding up, whether I needed company, whether I was eating enough. It should have comforted me, but his timing was too perfect. Blake and Candace had failed, so Trevor was sent to try another tactic. He wanted to sound like the reasonable one, the mediator, but behind every soft word was the same hunger. I told him I was fine, and he paused long enough for me to hear the irritation under his breath. He tried again, pressing me about the estate, suggesting that managing everything might be too much stress for me, that Henry had wanted the family to share responsibilities. I let him speak. My silence unsettled him just as it had his brother. In the end, he muttered something about visiting soon and hung up. When the line went dead, I felt strangely calm. One by one, they were showing me who they had become. The masks they wore for the world no longer worked in front of me. Blake's mask of confidence had cracked into desperation. Candace's mask of concern had shattered into cruelty. And Trevor's mask of reason was already slipping, revealing calculation underneath. I decided to prepare. The next morning, I drove to the lawyer again, folder in hand. He studied the documents, frowning as he turned each page. Embezzlement, he muttered. Fraud. If this reaches court, Blake will lose everything. He looked at me carefully, as if weighing how much of the truth I could bear. Mrs. Diaz, these records give you leverage. You must decide how to use it. Leverage. The word rang in my mind long after I left his office. I had never thought of myself as someone who wielded leverage. I had been a mother, a wife, a homemaker. But now I was something else, forged by grief, sharpened by betrayal. The evidence in my hands was not just paper. It was a weapon. That evening, I received another knock at the door. This time it was Candace alone. She arrived without Blake, her eyes wide with an expression carefully crafted to look vulnerable. She carried no flowers, only a tin of cookies from the bakery downtown. I almost laughed. The woman who once dismissed my blueberry pie now thought she could soften me with sugar. She sat across from me, folding her hands as though in prayer. Delilah, she began softly, I did not mean to upset you. We all said things we should not have. We are family. We should not let misunderstandings break us apart. Her performance was polished, but I could see the cracks. Her nails tapped against the tin nervously. Her smile wavered when I did not answer. I let the silence grow again, the same silence that had unmasked them before. Finally, she leaned closer, her whisper sharp. You cannot handle this alone. You will regret it if you try. There it was, the truth beneath the sugar, not concern, not family, threat. I stood and walked to the cabinet, retrieved Henry's letter, and placed it on the table between us. Her eyes darted over the familiar handwriting, the bold declaration of his trust in me. I did not let her read it all. I folded it again, slowly, deliberately, and looked her in the eye. Henry chose me. He gave me everything, and I am not afraid of you. Her face twisted for just a heartbeat, the mask slipping to reveal the cold fury underneath. She stood quickly, muttered something about trying to help, and left without touching the cookies she had brought. When the door closed, I exhaled a breath I had not realized I was holding. They were circling me like wolves, each taking their turn, each testing for weakness. But the more they pressed, the stronger I felt. I had leverage, I had Henry's letter. And most of all, I had clarity. That night I placed both the folder and the letter back under my pillow. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the quiet, feeling the fire inside me settle into something steady and unshakable. They thought I was cornered. They thought I would fold, but I had unmasked them, one by one, and there was no going back. The storm had only begun, and I was ready to meet it head-on. That night, after Candace's false sweetness had faded from the air, I found myself pacing the house like a restless spirit. Every room seemed to whisper at me. The photographs on the walls, the worn rugs under my feet, even the creak of the stairs as I climbed them, all of it reminded me that Henry's presence lingered here, but so did something else. Something unfinished. Sleep would not come. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the folder of Blake's debts, the cracks in Candace's smile, the soft lies in Trevor's voice over the phone. It was as though every one of them had rehearsed their roles in a play written long before Henry's death. If they had been planning for so long, what else might be hiding beneath the surface? By 2 a.m, I could not bear lying in bed any longer. I rose, lit a small lamp, and wandered down the hallway. My feet carried me to the old cabinet again, the one that had given me Henry's first letter. I had already searched it, pulled out folders and passports, wept over the words he left me. But a strange pull made me kneel in front of it once more. Perhaps it was foolishness, or perhaps it was instinct. Grief sharpens some instincts like a blade. I tugged open the bottom drawer. The wood groaned with age, and inside I found only dust, brittle envelopes, receipts for car repairs decades past, tax returns so old they belonged to another lifetime. My hands moved slowly, sifting through the paper, not really expecting to find anything. And then my palm struck something hollow. I froze. I pressed down again. The base of the drawer shifted slightly under my weight. My pulse quickened. Henry had always been good with his hands, always tinkering, always building. He had loved secrets, little compartments in his workshop where he kept spare bolts and tools. Could he have built one here too? I pressed harder, and with a reluctant groan the panel slid back. My breath caught. Inside was a small metal box, no bigger than a shoebox, coated with dust. The lock was old and rusted, but it gave way after a few twists of a hairpin. When the lid opened, the air seemed to change. The shadows in the hallway deepened, and the silence pressed down on me. Inside the box lay an envelope marked in Henry's familiar hand. One word scrawled across the front, trust. My throat tightened. I whispered his name as though he might answer, as though the paper itself carried his breath. With shaking fingers, I unfolded the letter inside. Delilah, if you are reading this, then the day came sooner than I hoped. The first letter gave you strength. This one must give you caution. There is more to what I left behind. Years ago, I discovered things in the company that were not mistakes but theft. It goes deeper than Blake. It involves men I once thought were friends. I feared telling you while I was alive because I knew you would try to fix everything. I needed you safe. But if you hold this now, you must be careful. Do not trust anyone until you know who is standing in the shadows. The words blurred as tears stung my eyes. I forced myself to keep reading. Attached to the letter were bank records, transactions that stretched back years. Large sums moved quietly to accounts overseas, signed by names I recognized from company dinners, men who had shaken my hand with smiles that now looked like masks in my memory. At the bottom of the stack was a photograph. Blake stood beside a man I knew only vaguely, an associate of Henry's from long ago. The two of them shook hands, their eyes narrowed, their smiles stiff. On the back, in Henry's handwriting, were 3 chilling words, "Watch this one." I sat on the floor surrounded by shadows, clutching the papers, my chest heavy with the weight of realization. This was bigger than I imagined. My sons were greedy, yes, but they were also pawns in something larger. Henry had not only protected me from them, he had protected me from a circle of men powerful enough to bury the truth. The urge to burn the papers clawed at me. If I destroyed them, perhaps the danger would vanish. But then I thought of Henry writing those letters in secret, hiding them away where no one could find them except me. He had believed I could bear this burden. To destroy them would be to betray that trust. I slid everything back into the box, locked it again, and placed it under my arm. The lamp flickered as I walked back to the bedroom, as though the house itself understood what I carried. When I lay down, I set the box on the nightstand and rested my hand on it, as though keeping watch over something sacred. The night gave no answers, only silence. But as I closed my eyes, one thought burned through me. I was not just fighting greedy children. I was facing enemies I could not yet see, enemies who had already touched my family long before I realized it. And for the first time, I wondered if Henry had known he would not survive, not only because of his illness, but because of the shadows that had already gathered around us. The box sat on my nightstand like a living thing, its presence impossible to ignore. Even in the dim light of dawn, I felt its weight pressing against me. I rose early, brewed coffee, and carried the box to the kitchen table. For a long time, I simply stared at it, my fingers tracing the cold metal. Part of me wished I had never opened that drawer, never found the false panel, never discovered that Henry's foresight stretched deeper than I wanted to believe. But another part of me, the part that had begun to awaken since that humiliating dinner, understood that ignorance was no longer safety. It was weakness. I opened the box again and forced myself to study the records with clear eyes. Numbers, names, dates, so many trails leading to accounts overseas. Some transfers had been made in small amounts, others in massive chunks that could not be explained away as accidents, and the signatures were undeniable. Men who had stood at our table, toasted Henry's health, praised our family with smiles that now seemed poisonous. The photograph haunted me most. Blake's handshake with that man, both of them stiff, both of them guarded. I tried to remember when it was taken. The background showed a conference room I vaguely recalled from a company gala years ago. Had Henry been there that night, watching, suspecting? Or had he received this photo from someone else, someone who wanted him to know the truth? My husband had carried this burden silently, and now it had fallen on me. I pushed the papers aside and stared out the window. The garden Henry once tended had grown wild, ivy curling up the fence, weeds pushing through the soil. It mirrored the state of our lives, roots strong but chaos spreading. I whispered his name to the empty air. You should have told me. You should have let me share this while you were alive. But I understood too. He had feared I would try to fight before I was ready. By mid-morning, Trevor arrived unannounced. He wore a pressed suit as though he had just stepped from a meeting, his tie knotted too tightly. He greeted me with a warm smile, so different from Blake's forced charm or Candace's brittle sweetness. He sat across from me at the table, leaning forward with practiced concern. "Mother," he began softly, "you know Blake has always been reckless. He makes mistakes, but we cannot let those mistakes destroy the family. Let me handle this. Give me the authority and I will protect what Father built." I studied him carefully. His words were gentle, his tone almost comforting, but his eyes flickered to the side where the box sat, half hidden beneath papers. My heart tightened. He knew, or at least suspected, that I had found something. His kindness was not kindness at all. It was calculation. I asked him what he knew about the company's partners. A shadow crossed his face, quick but unmistakable. He dismissed my question, told me I was letting grief cloud my judgment, told me I was imagining enemies where there were none, but his hands betrayed him. He fiddled with his cufflinks, his knuckles whitening as he tightened the metal again and again. In that moment, I saw him clearly. Trevor was no mediator. He was the quiet one, the one who waited until others failed, the one who slipped into the vacuum left behind. Blake raged, Candace schemed, but Trevor plotted. When he left, pressing a kiss to my forehead with a performance worthy of the stage, I closed the door and locked it firmly. My sons were not only greedy, they were aligned with something larger, something that reached into the shadows Henry had warned me about. That night I could not eat. The box sat on the table while I paced the kitchen, torn between dread and determination. Each page inside felt like both a shield and a target. If I revealed them, I might destroy the men circling me. But if I revealed them too soon, I might also paint a mark on my own back. I placed Henry's second letter beside the first. Two voices from the grave, guiding me, warning me, arming me. I felt his presence stronger than ever, not in the photographs or the chair he once sat in, but in the words he left me. He had known they would come for me. He had known the fight would stretch beyond family arguments into something far darker. As I prepared for bed, I slipped the box back under the false panel in the cabinet. I whispered to the silence, not a prayer but a vow. I will not run. I will not be silenced. You trusted me, Henry, and I will carry this until the end. When I lay down, exhaustion finally pulled me into sleep. My dreams were filled with shadows moving through my house, whispering my name, pressing their hands against the walls as though testing for cracks. I woke with a start before dawn, sweat dampening my skin, but my resolve unshaken. The secret was mine now, and I understood what it meant. My sons were not just my opponents. They were pawns in a game Henry had uncovered, a game that had cost him everything. The men in the shadows were waiting, and I could almost feel their eyes on me already. But I was not the same woman they thought they could corner. I had unmasked the pretenders in my own home. Soon, I would unmask the ones hiding in the dark. The air in the house had changed. It no longer carried only the weight of grief but something sharper, something that made my skin prickle as though unseen eyes were watching. Every morning I woke with the same thought, who will come for me today? Every night I fell asleep with Henry's letters under my pillow, whispering his name like a shield. I thought I had seen betrayal already. Blake's arrogance, Candace's manipulation, Trevor's quiet plotting, they had stripped away the masks of my own children and their partners. But betrayal is never satisfied with just one face. It multiplies. It creeps closer, quieter, until it is standing in your kitchen wearing a smile you have trusted for years. That morning, I spent hours at the kitchen table. I laid out Henry's letters once more, smoothing the creases as though they were fragile bones. The first letter had been his gift of strength, the second his warning of shadows. Together, they formed a map of a world I had never wanted to walk into but now found myself standing in the middle of. I traced the ink with my fingertip and whispered aloud, "You trusted me, Henry, but you also feared what would happen after you were gone, and you were right." The phone buzzed. Trevor's name flashed across the screen. I ignored it, but the voicemail came seconds later. His voice was calm, careful, every word chosen like a lawyer building a case. "You cannot fight us all. Meet me tomorrow. We can work this out quietly." That last word, quietly, made my stomach twist. Quiet did not mean peace. Quiet meant secrets. Quiet meant control. I set the phone aside, determined not to be drawn into his net. But as the hours passed, I heard another knock at the door. Not sharp and impatient like Blake. Not perfumed and calculated like Candace's. This knock was hesitant, almost shy. When I opened the door, it was Clara. Clara, my niece, the girl I had once held on my lap while she cried over exams, the girl who had helped me fold laundry during Henry's hospital stays, the girl whose kindness after the funeral had felt like the one soft place left in the world. She stood there now with her hair pulled back, a grocery bag in her hands, and a nervous smile. "Aunt Delilah," she said softly, "I brought you some bread and fruit. I thought you might not have eaten." My chest loosened at the sound of her voice. For a moment I let myself believe this was what it seemed, a small act of kindness. I let her in, poured her tea, and we sat at the table as though the world had not shifted beneath us. We spoke of small things at first. The garden, the weather, how the nights were getting colder. Her laughter was gentle, familiar. I almost forgot the heaviness pressing on me. But then her eyes drifted to the cabinet in the hallway. She tried to hide it, sipping her tea quickly, but I saw the flicker of curiosity. Her voice changed when she spoke again, lower, careful. "Aunt Delilah, did Uncle Henry ever leave you anything unusual?" The cup froze in my hands. My heart skipped. "Unusual?" I asked, forcing a small laugh. "What do you mean?" She shrugged, too casually. "You know, papers maybe. He was always so organized. People at the company said he had secrets. I just wondered if he shared them with you." My body went cold. Clara, the one person I had not suspected, was here fishing, not for her own sake. She had been sent, by Trevor, perhaps, or Blake, or maybe even the men in Henry's hidden documents. The realization hit me like a slap. I smiled, tilting my head as though confused. "Your uncle was careful," I said gently. "But no, he left nothing unusual, just memories." The lie slid out smoother than I expected. Her eyes searched mine, looking for a crack. She forced a smile, but I saw the disappointment underneath. She finished her tea quickly and rose to leave, hugging me tightly at the door. I held her longer than she expected, studying her face. There was guilt there, small but unmistakable, hiding beneath affection. She pulled away too quickly, mumbling about coming back soon. I watched her walk down the path, her shoulders stiff, her head lowered. When the door closed, I leaned against it, trembling. Clara, sweet, helpful Clara, the one who had carried groceries and whispered comfort after the funeral. She had been my solace, and now she was my warning. I walked to the cabinet and pressed my hand against the wood. Inside, hidden behind the false panel, the metal box waited. If Clara knew to ask, then the secret was already leaking through cracks I had not seen. Someone was whispering about me, someone close. I pulled the box out, opened it, and stared at Henry's second letter again. "Do not trust anyone until you know who is standing in the shadows." My throat tightened. He had been right again. Even kindness could be a mask. Even family could be a knife slipped quietly between the ribs. That night, I carried the box into my bedroom and set it on the nightstand. I did not put it back in the cabinet. I wanted it close, where I could hear its weight in the silence. I sat in Henry's chair and whispered to the dark. They think they can surround me with betrayal, but I will surround them with truth. The moonlight spilled across the papers, turning ink into silver. I pressed my hand over them as though sealing a vow. I would not run. I would not be silenced. No matter who turned against me, even Clara, even those who wore the mask of love, I would carry the truth Henry had trusted me with. And as I finally closed my eyes, I realized something terrifying but undeniable. The betrayal closest to the heart always hurts the most, but it also hardens you. And I was becoming harder than stone. The next morning broke with a sky the color of ash, and for a moment I wondered if even the weather had grown tired of this war. The house felt heavy, like the silence was no longer mine but borrowed, and soon someone would come to take it away. I sat at the kitchen table with Henry's letters spread before me, the box beside my elbow untouched. The steam from my coffee curled upward and disappeared, much like the remnants of trust I once had for my family. Blake's message from the night before still echoed in my mind. We know you are hiding things. Do not make this worse. It wasn't just a warning. It was an admission. They had begun to suspect I was not as powerless as they believed. My silence had unsettled them. They wanted me to break, to hand everything over before they had to admit what they feared, that I was stronger than they were willing to face. By mid-morning, Trevor arrived. He didn't knock like Blake, loud and impatient, and he didn't perfume the air like Candace. He tapped gently, 3 polite knocks, like a man who thought courtesy could disguise his purpose. When I opened the door, he was dressed immaculately, his tie knotted perfectly, his shoes polished. His expression was calm, his eyes warm. It was a mask, but a convincing one. "Mother," he said softly, "you shouldn't be alone so much. It's not healthy." I let him in, though every step he took into the house made my skin crawl. He sat at the table across from me, his eyes scanning the room, pausing on the box. He smiled as though it meant nothing, but his glance lingered too long. He knew, or at least suspected, what I had found. He began slowly, speaking in the tone of a diplomat. "Blake has made mistakes, we both know that, but we can't let his recklessness destroy everything Father built. You don't need to handle all of this alone. Give me the authority and I will protect the family. I will protect you. Protect me." The words rolled bitterly in my head. Protection had been Henry's promise, and he had kept it even from the grave. Trevor's promise was nothing but control wrapped in silk. I didn't answer, letting the silence stretch. He mistook it for hesitation and leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You're not well," he said gently. "Grief clouds judgment. You could sign the transfer papers today and everything would be easier. We can keep this quiet. No courts, no shame, just family working together." There it was again, that word, quiet. It wasn't a word of comfort. It was a word of suffocation. Quiet meant erasure. Quiet meant being pushed aside until my voice was nothing but dust. I finally met his gaze. "Your father wanted me to protect what we built, and I will." For a second the mask slipped. His jaw tightened, his eyes flashed. He pressed his lips into a thin line, then leaned forward until his voice was almost a hiss. "If you make enemies of us, you won't survive this." The words hung in the air, heavier than any scream. They weren't a threat shouted in anger. They were spoken in calm certainty, like a man stating a fact. It chilled me more than Blake's arrogance or Candace's false kindness. This was Trevor's true self, the quiet one, the patient one, the one who struck only when he was sure it would land. I said nothing. My silence was sharper than any reply. He straightened his tie, smoothed his jacket, and stood. "Think about it," he said with a smile that no longer reached his eyes. Then he left, closing the door gently behind him, as if he hadn't just promised to destroy me. When the door clicked shut, I locked it and pressed my back against the wood. My breath came hard, uneven. The house felt smaller now, the walls closing in. I had known my sons wanted control. I hadn't realized how far Trevor was willing to go to get it. That night I pulled out a notebook and began to write. I wrote everything, every word, every glance, every threat. I wrote about Clara's visit, about the guilt in her eyes. I wrote about Candace's lies, about Blake's debts, about Trevor's whisper. I wrote until my hand ached, until the ink smudged under my fingers. At the top of the page, I scrawled one word, betrayals. The notebook became my own secret letter, a record that would live even if I did not. If they thought they could silence me, they would find instead a voice stronger than mine alone, a voice written in ink, undeniable, untouchable. Before I went to bed, I placed the notebook inside Henry's box, resting it beside his letters. The weight of it felt like a shield. For the first time since he died, I realized I was not only carrying his secrets. I was adding my own. Together, they formed a wall between me and the shadows pressing closer each day. As I lay down, I whispered to the dark, "You trusted me, Henry, and I will not let your trust die. Even if they all turn against me, even if betrayal surrounds me, I will not break." The house gave no answer. But the silence, once oppressive, now felt like an ally. I closed my eyes knowing betrayal had taken root in every corner of my family. And yet, that knowledge did not weaken me. It hardened me, because betrayal, once uncovered, loses its power, and I was no longer blind. The storm did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, like a shadow moving across the floor, until the whole room was covered and I realized too late that the light was gone. The days after Trevor's threat felt like walking along the edge of a cliff. One wrong step, one careless word, and I would tumble into darkness. I spent hours each day going through Henry's letters and the notebook I had begun to keep. The pages grew thicker with every detail, every conversation, every expression, every message from Blake, every whisper from Candace, every silence from Trevor. I documented it all because the truth was my only weapon, and if I were silenced, someone else would have to carry it. One evening, as rain tapped against the windows, I received another visitor. This time it wasn't family. It was Martin, one of Henry's oldest colleagues, a man I had seen at countless dinners. His smile was warm, his embrace gentle, but my heart clenched the moment he stepped into the room. He was the man in the photograph, the one shaking Blake's hand, the one Henry had warned me to watch. He looked around the house as though cataloging it, his eyes sharp beneath the softness of his words. "Delilah," he said kindly, "I wanted to check on you. Losing Henry was hard on all of us. And now, well, I've heard you've been under pressure." The way he said it, as though he knew more than he admitted, made me want to slam the door in his face. But I smiled and offered him tea. My mother once told me that when an enemy enters your home, you do not show your fear, you serve them tea. He sat at the table across from me, his hands folded neatly. "You know," he continued, "Henry and I worked closely for years. There were unfinished matters. Perhaps you found them." I felt my blood turn cold. Henry's warning echoed in my ears. "Watch this one." I shook my head gently. "Henry left me only memories," I said, my voice calm, but Martin's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time his smile faltered. "You're a strong woman, Delilah, but strength can be dangerous. For you, for your sons, for the company." He let the words linger, then sipped his tea. The silence stretched between us. I understood then that the storm was not just my family tearing itself apart. It was bigger, darker, and it had stepped into my kitchen wearing the face of an old friend. After he left, the house no longer felt like my own. Every corner seemed to carry his presence, every shadow his threat. I locked the doors, pulled the curtains, and pressed my back against the wall, my heart pounding. That night I wrote again, filling pages until my hand cramped. I wrote of Martin's visit, of his veiled threat, of the way he had looked at me as though I were already defeated. And then I wrote Henry's name over and over, until the ink bled through the page. The storm had finally broken. It was no longer whispers behind my back or threats hidden in kindness. It was here, in my home, staring me in the eye. But as I lay awake, listening to the rain lash against the windows, I realized something important. The storm was not only theirs. It was mine too, and I was ready to let it rage. The rain had not stopped by morning. It beat against the windows like impatient fingers demanding to be let inside. I brewed coffee, but its warmth did little to ease the chill that had settled in my bones. Martin's visit still lingered in the air, his words echoing louder than the storm outside. He had not come to comfort me. He had come to test me, to see whether Henry's secrets were still buried. By midday, another knock came at the door. This time it was not gentle. It was sharp, insistent, the sound of someone who believed they had the right to enter. When I opened it, Blake stood there, his hair damp from the rain, his eyes burning with anger. He didn't wait for an invitation. He pushed past me and stepped into the living room, dripping water onto the floor. "You've gone too far, Mother," he snapped. "Trevor told me what you said to him. You think you can hold this over us? You think you're stronger than we are." I closed the door calmly, though my pulse thundered in my ears. "Blake," I said evenly, "you should leave." But he only laughed, a sound sharp and cruel. "Leave, this is my house too, my inheritance. You're just keeping it warm until we take it back." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We know about the letters, we know about the box." My breath caught, though I refused to show it. Clara, it had to be. She had told them. The betrayal I had hoped was only suspicion had proven real. Blake's grin widened when he saw the flicker in my eyes. "So it's true," he said. "You found Father's little games. Did you think you could use them against us? Do you know what happens to people who cross the men he dealt with?" His words slipped out before he could stop them, and in that moment I saw the truth. Blake wasn't just greedy, he was already tangled in the web Henry had warned me about. The shadows were not only circling us, they were inside my family. I stepped forward, closing the space between us, and spoke in a voice steadier than I felt. "Your father trusted me, he gave me everything, and you will never take it from me." For a heartbeat, Blake faltered. He wasn't used to my defiance, wasn't prepared for me to face him without fear. He muttered a curse, shoved his hands into his pockets, and stormed out into the rain. The slam of the door shook the house, but it did not shake me. When silence returned, I sank into Henry's chair, my hands trembling. The truth was out now. They knew. The box was no longer just my secret. It was a target. I pressed my palms together and whispered, "Henry, give me strength." That night, thunder rolled across the sky as though the heavens themselves were echoing my turmoil. I moved the box again, hiding it in a place even Clara would not think to search. Then I sat with my notebook and wrote everything: Blake's rage, his slip of the tongue, the certainty that he was in deeper than I had realized. The storm outside raged louder, and inside me another storm answered it. I was not the woman they thought they could break. The storm belonged to them, yes, but it also belonged to me. And when it finally reached its peak, I would be ready.